All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Or, well, everyone who will turn up in 10 minutes because I didn't prepare the stream in time. Well, this week we have Robert King on. And this week it's given us a few sort of distracting headlines. But the big ticket items, there's only one big ticket item that's been really attracting everyone's attention. The biggest items in my mind have mostly escaped broad coverage. Those would be issues like the South African Reserve Bank pushing for increased integration of the financial system, digitalization, cashless society, that kind of stuff. That's a fairly big point. The other one would be something which has only been covered on like small Caxton media pages, and then once on IOL, which is Ian Cameron's. Not Ian Cameron's, but he was the only public official to comment on this. Which is the ANC's attempt to push through an amendment to the Firearms Control Act without public consultation. So we're going to touch on those in a bit, but first let's deal with she's too skinny to be called the elephant in the room, but certainly, wrinkly enough. Helen Zille.
Yes. Who I am today, as you can see by my name.
Yeah, we're Helen Zille in the studio.
Yes, it's an honor to be here. Actually, I wrote an award-winning piece earlier this week for Biz News about Zille and Johannesburg and what I'm terming the DA's Joburg delusion, going through the stats really behind, the DA's past record in coalition governments, especially in Gauteng, and also just how dire that mathematical situation they're in there at the moment. They only got 25% of the vote in Johannesburg in the last provincial and national elections, and some of their optimistic polling has them as high as 40%, but this is DA internal polling saying that they're at 40%, which I think is like the high end of estimates, if it's coming from the DA, especially when the DA always does well during those midterm periods. It doesn't seem like...
Always confused me. That's something that's always confused me is, the DA gets these big numbers in between the elections. And when it comes to the elections, you get those exit polls. And no matter which election it is, the number or the proportion of the black population who support them is always at 4.4, 4.5%. It fluctuates almost nothing at all over the past 30 years. And strangely enough, the polls show completely different figures in between the elections. So I'm really confused as to how this ends up being the case, because it's not like these are not professional pollsters. I mean, it's like it baffles me.
Well, a lot of it is attributed to the fact that the ANC can mobilise such a large segment of the election of the electorate in the months leading up to an election. So I imagine without that mobilisation effort, you would have really, really low black turnout. But of that black turnout, the DA's voters would still come out, which would give them a disproportionately high share of the black vote. At the moment, but look, what we're seeing at the moment, you've got some polls that say the DA's on 28%, 30%. It's nothing new. Before the 2024 elections, we had some polls putting them as high as 32% coming out. I think this was literally in early 2024. You still had those polls right before the ANC's mobilisation efforts. So, we all know that this is in some ways strategic from certain factors. If you can sell that narrative that the DA is maybe going to be the largest party in Johannesburg or even in the entire country, then it prevents certain people from voting for parties like the Referendum Party, Cape Independence Party, Freedom Front. It pushes people away from those options and brings them back into the DA camp. So I believe there's that element to it as well.
Yeah, look, when they really need to do a forensic analysis, they're quite brutal. I remember, I still refer back, and I think, everyone should go look this up. The post-electoral analysis from 2019 that was done by Ryan Coetzee and Tony Leon and, of all people, Michiel Leroux. I'm not sure how he pronounces it, but no, Mr. Kapitek, who's secured a juicy contract with the Department of Home Affairs for his loyal service to the party. I should stress we don't know if there was a quid pro quo, but appearances are not edifying. So for my money, I think that actually there's a fairly good chance of Helen Zille becoming premier. I actually don't think that it's. I mean, look, the big figures they're pushing may be inflated, and I think that Helen Zille is right to point them out, both strategically and factually, because strategically it says, actually, this looks good and this is what we could get, but it's not for sure. Get boots on the ground, make sure you vote really hard. And the consequences of her getting in charge, that's different. I think, look, what's going to happen is they could end up being first or second biggest party in Johannesburg. It's possible. The ANC EFF MK little axis seems to have, in current polling, like when you look at the really optimistic ones, that Charterist bloc, the Charterists have 50% of the vote. So that's like our most optimistic, is the Charterists still hold 50%. Now, it depends largely on what, oh dear, we've lost our dear leader. But what has been, what we could see is a potential coalition between the DA and the ANC at a municipal level. Now, rumors from people who are connected to some of these parties have intimated early after the national coalition was launched that there was a likelihood of this coalition being extended down to the municipal and provincial levels. So these are rumors, of course. They do come from people who we regard as reliable, but it's still in the speculative phase. I think the thing that I would watch out for is the potential for Helen Zille to try and broker a deal with the ANC in that province. It'll be difficult because Panyaza Lesufi is still there, and he's still a big bargaining factor, and he is not friendly with the DA. So there's a strong chance that if the DA can't hit those optimistic numbers, they won't win Johannesburg. But I wouldn't rule out them actually getting in. I wouldn't rule it out. There's also the possibility of the Charterists pulling a retreat and letting them run a minority government with supply and confidence. And that, I think, would actually have the maximum, have the absolute maximum strategic impact if you were in the ANC. This is what I would do. If I was Panyaza Lesufi, I would grant the DA leadership of a minority council, supply and confidence, disrupt the council like they did in Nelson Mandela Bay so that you can't pass anything. And then meanwhile, you tweak those evergreen contracts through the legal office, and you make sure that you can loot the coffers right from under their feet. This would mean that Johannesburg would be unable to change. They would become they would fail very rapidly, and the DA would be blamed for it. Then Lesufi can sweep in, push them under administration, like they did with Tshwane, loot tons of money, and then wait for the Constitutional Court to rule that they've been buggering around, hand it back to the DA and say, look at how they screwed up the budget. And it's like, okay, I'm opposed to the DA as hard as I think anyone in South Africa on the sort of conservative side of things is. However, their problem isn't that they're bad at managing finances per se. Like if you take a look at the Cape Town budget, it's enormously profligate. The amount of money they spaff on vanity projects and stuff like that is enormous. If the ANC were doing it, the city would have gone bankrupt and destroyed like Detroit 10 years ago. but they have good financial teams. They know how to manage debt financing and so on. And so even if they're writing off a fair amount of debt every budget cycle, they are keeping the thing afloat and keeping the credit rating at a tolerable level. But up north, the problems are different. It's not, oh, can you manage this bloated budget? It's more like, do you understand power politics? And there's a strange thing that happens with the DA. They're capable of being unbelievably ruthless down here in the Cape with their opposition to the right. If you look at the battle they had with Vryheidsfront Plus leading into the GNU and a few months into the GNU, right up until the early months of this year, it was an absolute tooth and nail fight where, with a lot of dirty tricks. We've written about them extensively. We've talked about it extensively. But for some reason, when they go up against the DA, they say they come across all sheepish. I don't think they're going to make it.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point you made. Well, look, two interesting points there. I'll start with just your point making the comparison with the Cape and Cape Town, because obviously that's what the DA keeps on pointing to in terms of their Joburg plan. If they were able to rescue Cape Town with Helen Zille, then naturally they'll be able to rescue Johannesburg. But obviously there are two big differences there. Obviously the demographics in Cape Town are substantially different and they're far more favourable to the DA. But at the same time, we're talking about 20 years difference. I mean, if it was 2006 and Helen Zille was running Johannesburg, maybe there's a chance, the city hasn't degraded as much. Maybe there's a chance you can turn things around there. But we're talking 20 years onwards. If Cape Town had been run by the ANC up until this point, I can imagine it would be in a far worse situation than it was now. And maybe the DA wouldn't be able to rescue the city. But then on your point regarding the ANC, I agree that maybe that is the realistic power play taking place here, some sort of arrangement involving the ANC, because I think what we're going to see going forward now after Johannesburg as well, after the elections take place there, is that the DA is going to be pushing this narrative that in 2029 we can be the largest party, we're going to be the largest party, the ANC is falling behind us. Now that doesn't change the bloc dynamics between the African nationalists and the non-charterist parties, as you would call it. That doesn't matter for the DA. They'll push that narrative over and over again. And what I'm thinking is maybe they're going to try, if they can become the largest party in Johannesburg, to test that arrangement on the local level. So you've got a DA as the senior partner and the ANC as the junior partner as a trial run for 2029, when they can hope that they can be the senior party in the GNU and the ANC will be a junior partner. Now, I don't think the ANC would agree to that, but it seems like for the DA, I would imagine that that's their best play, at least from their perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, look, one of the things that people miss when they talk about this is they think that there's somehow people's memories get fuzzy before the year 2010, and nothing before then seems to exist. I think, if you look at the Western Cape here, you're seeing, okay, well, the DA has gotten really big there. Wow, very impressive. But what they did is they traded the electorate from the NNP, right? And so there's a brief confused period where you get a couple of coalition governments and so on happening around here. But what really happens is that you have the same support level that you see at this data point over here from 1994 is, well, that's right where we are now, right? I mean, look, the ANC and EFF put together, here we go. You notice I said charterist, me and my sort of silly jargon, but it's important because the ANC splinter parties are the ANC. So the issue over here would be saying, okay, well, what are these groups actually capable of? And I don't know if they're capable of much. I'm sorry about the lack of the 2024 data point. I need to export the image from my Excel spreadsheet again. But it's it doesn't. There's nothing substantial changing there. It's an organizational instability, not a fundamental change in the electorate's disposition. So, but there's a persistent feature that I saw across the municipal elections in 2021. Now, you can see it whether you're looking at, here's Ekurhuleni, there's Pretoria, Tshwane, and there's Johannesburg, and where's the other one? Lots of stuff in that folder. This is just sort of like frequently used data data images that I use. But one of the things that you see across these metros, especially when you get to, I think, there we go, Nelson Mandela Bay. I think Nelson Mandela Bay is, I mean, they always say this thing about, there's nothing that we did in Cape Town that can't be replicated elsewhere. But I think you can, if you just substitute Cape Town for Nelson Mandela Bay, and that sentence holds true, because what has happened in Nelson Mandela Bay happened in all the other metros as well. So where the ANC managed to get into a coalition, the coalition was unstable and ineffective. And it's not due to the level of competency of the politicians that they employed. The executive bodies that they employed often included fairly talented people. I mean, Nelson Mandela Bay had Athol Trollip still operating at the time. He was a fairly punchy fella. But the problem is that you're looking at a situation where they simply cannot, what's it called? They can't control their political environment. And because of that, you get a section of the electorate who kind of give up on them, and then the growth is lost. So they have this little swing electorate that bumped them up from 39 to, I think, 46, and then they went back down to 39. And that's the end of that.
Do you know the racial demographics when it comes to voting are in Nelson Mandela Bay? Because if I remember correctly, the overall demographics of that municipality is just over 60% black and then 40% minority. But obviously your actual voters are going to lean heavily more to the minority side. So
that's true. They are over-indexed. But one of the things that I did a calculation, and fortunately I caught this before today because I have to finish this report for Monday. This is why I've been posting so little to the website. I've been working on this big sort of demographic report on the Western Cape, options and prospects for, secession and so on. It's actually a commission piece. So I have to sort of put foot on that one because keeps my lights on. But one of the things that you have to do if you want to project, if you want to get a projection of how people are going to vote or whatever, is you have to adjust for voter turnout. And I mean, I did this a while ago with what's his face? I can't remember that guy's name. Chris Pappas. So I did this article on Chris Pappas like a year ago or whatever it was. It was before the big national elections. And everyone was sort of pointing to him as this golden child who'd somehow, caught the hearts of the Zulu people and so on because, he can dance pansula and he can wear, with a Letema pattern on and everything, And I sort of thought, okay, well, yeah, maybe, but let's just have a look. What are the demographics? And I go, okay, well, it's 22% white. And then there's about 5% minorities, and then the rest are black. And you think, okay, well, that's impressive. And then you look at the voter turnout, and there's two numbers you need to look at to get voter turnout. It's not just how many registered voters turn out, but how much of the population are registered. So those together gave me an over-indexing factor of 67%. So you got to multiply the number of white people in the sample by 1.67, and that nearly doubles your support. And when you include the minorities, and then that 5% sort of minority-friendly black layer, that gives you a majority, and it's all driven by differences in turnout. So white people turned out a lot for those municipal elections. And so Chris Pappas got a big boost. And then he gets on like the cover of Times and everything, and they go, oh, they're going to change everything. And there was another interview I saw a while back, and I added a reference to this in that big article I did on the DA's 12-year strategy to merge with the ANC, and how it went wrong. And Helen Zille, in an interview with Biz News from about 2-3 years ago, she was boasting about this character called, I think her name was Annette Grobler. Well, something starting with an A, and the surname was Grobler. And she was in Mpumalanga. And she was saying, okay, this, white boervrouwtjie won 100% black ward, and, it just goes to show how, we're winning the battle, and the prejudice is gone, and, people just want to see good governance, whatever that means. And so I just had a quick peek. I thought, well, you know what? Maybe she's right. Let's have a look at it. You always check, But lo and behold, it turns out that she faced investigation for allegedly organizing land invasions as part of her strategy to get elected. I thought, oh, that's depressing. Because, and I think, yeah.
I don't know if you remember seeing this story from, I think it was before the 2024 elections, but it was one of these, again, nearly 100% black wards in Hermanus, where the DA went from like 5% to 32% of the vote in one by-election just before the election. So, I don't know what the story was there, but they had a really, really good result in Hermanus in one of the black wards there.
Yeah. I mean, it does happen. It's not that it's impossible. It's just that the statistical likelihood overall is very low.
The land party to DA voter pipeline.
The land party. I don't know. When I hear that, when I hear about them, I just get very, very angry, because it's not. I don't know. A while ago I was interested in who started it, and the names were the usual. There's like a little circle of white communist ladies from Hermanus who've been causing nonsense, and in their social media circle they had a number of property developers who were tied to, property developers in very heavy scare quotes, who were involved with the land party. And my suspicion is that a lot of the land party's sort of basic operation is effectively racketeering, which is why it's kind of lost momentum, because you can only go so far when other gangs have control of other areas.
They also nominated a Turkish guy. They also nominated a Turkish guy to be their premier candidate, which is just a bizarre move.
Yeah. That Mugu. I mean, I don't know how that man sort of. I don't know how anyone ends up working with someone that loony. It's got to get you down.
I've got a funny story. I've got a funny story there. So on election night, when I was at the IEC vote centre, I could see him literally on the other side of the room on TikTok. I think he was nearly kicked. I think he might have even been kicked out of the centre that evening. He was harassing people. He was on TikTok, so I was just, trolling him in the TikTok comments basically, and watching his reaction from the other side of the room, for the start of the evening. But yeah, no, it was such a bizarre development. Did we ever get to the bottom of how he was able to take control over the land party?
Beg your pardon?
Did we ever get to the bottom of how he was able to take control of the land party?
No. I mean, look, the thing is, I don't know anyone who knows the people in there. It's very, like, the social distance between where I am and where those white ladies are is very, very, very separated. So, yeah, but I think this is the main problem with the DA's optimism, is generally this unwillingness to examine the causes of their success where they have it, I mean, by the time they took over Cape Town, the transformation of the city's civil service was actually kind of minimal. And, it's completely different where you've had, entrenched sort of patronage networks for decades. So, like Johannesburg, they'd have to fire everyone in the civil service almost. I look at Tshwane now, and I was talking to councillors from that side, and they were saying, "Listen, part of the reason why China went bust, aside from all of the headline political stuff that's happening in the council and the provincial office and what have you, when the DA came in, the first thing they did is they handed everyone 10-year contracts. Like, oh, here's an olive branch. Don't worry, your jobs are not in jeopardy. We're going to work together just fine. And I was like, you never heard about, if you pay the Dane Geld, you get the Dane. That whole thing. It doesn't work. The way that incentives work is, well, straf. Straf works better in these cases. It's not positive incentives work for learning. They don't work for enforcing good behavior, if that makes sense. Yeah. So this is kind of some. This is the silly kind of thing that you get from the DA when they dealt with the ANC at the National Coalition. They had Ryan Coetzee come in and offer his sage advice on how to negotiate coalitions from his time working with the Liberal Democrats in the UK, and he applied that expertise to a perfect formula. He finally blocked me on Twitter when I brought up this particular failure. But yeah, I mean, look, it's one of those things where you'd think people with that much political experience wouldn't make such mistakes, and yet they do.
It's bad political experience that he has. I mean, it's election loss after election loss that he's overseen with the Liberal Democrats and Remain, and now the DA's negotiations in the GNU.
Yeah. But I mean, look, the DA's people are not really all that focused on fixing South Africa. Absolutely. South Africa is only allowed to be fixed if it can be done in line with a certain formula. And that means that any part of South Africa that could be saved by any other method has to be sort of crushed.
Well, I mean, it's got to be within the rules. I mean, you can't even think of going close to breaking any rules in this process, or standards, or conventions.
Yeah,
what happened.
It's mental because, I mean, I look at you remember back in 2022, and Sarkozy had that big victory at the Constitutional Court where they said, like, okay, well, actually, it turns out that public procurement, the racial quotas in public procurement, aren't strictly speaking enforceable. They're only enforceable as like a second or third level priority. And the first priority goes to the mandate to provide value for money. So this means that they had a perfect excuse to annul, to just ignore the procurement, the racial quotas. But they don't want to. In fact, they expand them and make them stricter by doubling down on the requirements for women and disabled. And I sort of go, okay, well, what is this ridiculous nonsense? They have an opportunity to end this, and they refuse to take it. And it's the same with the devolution stuff. It's like, well, do you want devolution?
Yeah, what they do in these situations is, instead of taking action and then, if something's wrong, you apologize later. But what they love to do is get bogged down in court cases regarding it. So they say, well, we're going to start a court case, or we're going to let this group start a court case, and then we'll wait for that result, and it will take a year or two to get a result. And in that time, hopefully the story goes away and we don't need to talk about it. That's exactly what happened with the referendum bill. Obviously, I think it was Cops Forum that went to court regarding that, or one of these groups went to court and tried to get it forced through. And obviously, the DA had their referendum legislation at the time, but then they basically undermined their referendum legislation the entire time. I actually, during that period, had the opportunity to confront Windy on this. And when I asked him what's happening with the referendum legislation, he deflected at first and said, well, it's got nothing to do with me because I'm just a premier. I don't know what's happening at the national level. And then secondly, his next point was, and there's also a court case, and we like to stick to what's in the law. So we're going to wait for that court case to complete. And then obviously they never did anything after that. But that seems to be the DA's standard response to a lot of these radical proposals.
No, it's a lot of prevarication, but there's some things that they're very keen on, and I think the biggest one of them is public-private partnerships. Now, for my money, I think public-private partnerships are are something that is fine. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with public-private partnerships, but to make it the rule and to say that it has to be done that way instead of going leaving it fully private or going fully public. It's like, well, neither of those options are good. We have to make sure that a sectoral leader is locked into a permanent monopoly and a permanent cronyist relationship with the state, like Sintel, for example. I mean, Sintel, a former weapons manufacturing partner of the apartheid state, that then got sucked into the Sariti inquiry, and then subsequently the Zondo inquiry. They just changed the company name in between, and restructured the ownership patterns. And these people they still have these, an almost permanent position in managing the entirety of the traffic services across most metropoles in the country, and almost every small municipality as well. They dominate in 6 of the 9 provinces in a way that, the remainder are just like not worth having a contract with. So it's like it creates these very sort of stably corrupt scenarios. And look, our traffic is managed terribly. Sintel does a terrible job. The only product that they sell where I can see that they're sort of adding value for a client, aside from their sort of technical manufacturing stuff, which still seems to be fairly decent, is the sale of private information of South African citizens to like the Belgians and the Canadians or whatever. And this is, I mean, I don't know if they're violating the Poppy Act or not. They probably tick all the right boxes and everything. But it's sort of like, you're selling traffic data that you're collecting from all over the shop, including people's license plates, so you can sort of view long-term behavior. I think. This is stuff that they're advertising on their own website. So I look at this and I don't really like it. Whether it's illicit or not, it's not the kind of thing that I think is healthy. And the big one for me is what they're doing with the banks. Mm-hmm. So Leon Schreiber has now started privatizing some of the operations of the Department of Home Affairs. And you'd say to yourself, well, look, the government's done such a bad job, why not let the private sector do it? Well, problem is the private sector has their own interests. And the 5 big banks in South Africa form more or less a cartel and coordinate their main, their main policies and rates, right? And they lock out competitors for the most part. They're soon. I understand they're soon to be joined by Old Mutual, who are opening their own sort of banking service. But this is the interesting thing for me, is that what Leon Schreiber is pushing through is like this digital ID stuff, and then he's coordinating with SARS to try and eliminate informal trading, and then the South African Reserve Bank is pushing through trying to rid the society of cash. And they've just bought up a majority position in PayShap, so that they can handle digital payments. And effectively, this is integrated with the banking cartel. And the banking cartel, they still control their transactions. They just use PayShap as a medium. And yeah, it's consolidating a nexus where sort of population control and financial management becomes centralized into a single organized system. And then there's different people who get to take a cut, but it's all a single program. And the long-term goal is to introduce central bank digital currencies. And like you hear this from the conspiracy side of things a lot, but it's like it is a valid concern. They are going to be introducing methods to have a completely inescapable totalitarian control of the entire economy. I mean, the DA is not too far off with this. I mean, when they pushed through the Climate Change Act, I mean, they didn't dissent from it. They didn't have any criticisms whatsoever. And this is a thing that empowers their minister, Dion George, to impose any emissions of any chemical or substance or whatever any kind of emission standard on any sector of the economy, any region in the country, or any individual company. He doesn't have to consult with anyone on it. It's just straightforward. He has as much power as, central.
That's a very interesting tactic that, as we've seen in Europe, especially in the Netherlands, if they really wanted to attack the farming industry, rather than go all overt about it and say, okay, we're going to start expropriating the farms without compensation, they could really devalue them by just setting those, nitrogen targets, like the Netherlands did, which
they did.
targets a lot of farms to do it here.
It's exactly right what you're saying, because in the case of the Dutch government, there was a conspiracy. It was an open conspiracy. Friends and family of the ruling parties who had connections to a certain clump of international corporations would have benefited from a plan to build a mega city that spans across the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And part of this mega city's sort of plan would involve getting rid of a huge amount of farmland, which would have been expensive. And so you just destroy the value of your agricultural sector and you can buy them up. I mean, this is nasty stuff. But I mean, you look at, Cape Town thinks in a very sort of ruthless way as well around public finance. So there's no long-term thinking at all. It's all, can you balance the budget now? And can you do something that looks sexy? So the way that they run Cape Town, like some of the vanity projects for me are really fascinating. Like, so there's this thing, Dial-A-Ride. So now Dial-A-Ride, at its core, it makes sense. It's a fairly sort of decent idea, which is that, disabled people can come and call the city and they can get a lift to go to work or whatever the hell, if they're in trouble. And great, shuttle service, whatever. But what they've done is they basically let anyone use it. And so now they're millions over budget. They can't sustain it. Now they're having to sort of say, actually, no, only the very disabled can actually use it. Only if you're really struggling. And I mean, I sort of think, well, why wasn't it like that from the start? I mean, why are you just spaffing money like it's, like it's free?
Yeah.
And then you have this problem with the middle class getting squeezed out, and they're giving all of this money to land invaders, so they don't have land available for housing. So who do they pick on? Well, they pick on colored people who've settled land from before apartheid ended and say, oh, you've got to scoot. They're doing this in Eersterrivier at the moment, right? And they've been terrorizing those people for months. Lots of fraud, lots of intimidation, shutting off their water, and it's... I mean, they do this in Grabo as well. So, like Grabo, you've got this enormous, ever-expanding horror show of a Eastern Cape settlement. DA don't touch it. But this tiny group of Khoisan are settling on an abandoned pine tree plantation in Knoflookskraal. No, they need to be addressed. I mean, Alan Windy went down to pay them a visit last week to try and sort of cajole them into pissing off. And it's the priorities are out of the window. And when Helen Zille gets on the radio and she says, okay, it's great that foreigners are buying up all of the property in Cape Town and pricing the middle class out of the place because they help us balance the budget so we can give more money to land invaders. I'm like, what the hell is this woman on? And, the interviewer, of course, asks her about all of these questions of partisan dignity, or, oh, is this comment pro-poor enough? Is that comment pro-black enough? All that kind of wank. And at no point has she been asked, actually, what are you going to do in Johannesburg? Nobody's asked her that. So we're sitting in a situation where the campaign to become leader of the most important city in the country doesn't involve any questions of actual public governance. It's entirely being done on the basis of personality.
Well, you can see that as well. It seems it was just this week that they gave a morning slot on Power FM to present that show. Again, I believe to probably boost her profile, to get more people aware of her in the city. So yeah, it definitely seems like there's a concerted effort from lots of different elements of society, really, to just amp up Helen Zille in the city.
Well, I mean, that's her right. It's a professional campaign. Pull pull rank, pull contacts, do what you got to do. But my question is, well, what is she actually going to do to fix the city? She just says, well, we've got good governance, we've got a track record. Have you really? I mean, every other time you try to fix a black metro, it's just died. You've died on your ass. And, whether or not you were doing a smart thing here or there is kind of besides the point. It's, can you get it done? And they just, for some reason, they don't realize the game that they're forced to play. So they never try and get more powers than they're given. It's like, well, we agree with all legislation and all bylaws. Everything's great, fine and dandy. We just need to implement it better. And there's never a critique of policy. There's never a critique of management style. There's never a plan for changing up, human resources, or the legal department, or anything like that. They don't have anything. There's like, let's spaff some more money on this thing that's really shiny, like Western Cape. They're talking about in Cape Town and Stellenbosch, and they're doing cycle paths. Nobody uses them. They did a little study on this in Cape Town a couple of years ago, and they said, well, to date we've spent 500 and whatever it is million rand, and 0.01% of the population use it. I mean, what is this?
Well, look, the other one at the moment is in Cape Town. Part of the big budget expenditure is the expansion of the My City bus line to Kailicha.
Good luck with that.
I believe, yeah, it looks like just a massive waste of money, because within a week you're going to have the taxis that are going to burn down the bus station, as we've already seen in Joe Slovo in Milnerton. They burnt down the bus station. I mean, it's been like that for years now. It hasn't been rebuilt. And you're going to have that all along that line to Kailicha. So, but it's a big thing they can announce to be pro-poor, with the pro-poor party. And no one speaks about, I mean, do you even hear politicians speaking about the middle class at any point? In these discussions, is it never mention of the middle class? And especially in your Johannesburg campaign, if you don't have the middle class there, because they're all coming down, or as many of them as possible are coming down to the Cape, without the middle class base in Johannesburg, you're not going to have the funds to fund this massive expenditure operation you're planning.
Right, exactly. And I mean, one of the big things that Frans Cronje goes on about when he's out in public is he talks about like the aspiring middle class. The middle class and the inspiring middle class. And I kind of go, yeah, okay, look, this makes sense, but nobody cares about them. They offer to spaff money on things, but there's no actual policy out there for trying to fix property prices. There's stupid shit like what they're doing in Stellenbosch, where they want to introduce rent control. I mean, anybody who's read about the effects of rent control in American cities or whatever will realize that what happens is the connected make sure that there are hidden fees that mean that you can't get onto the property's sort of application list. And then you have the same problem. Or you let in someone who is going to squat, and then you've lost your title, and then the property loses money because you're just paying for it, and you can't even maintain it, because how do you get into the apartment? So they're just going to destroy this, and they're going to make property values skyrocket, because they're going to make it harder to develop, harder to sell. It's just going to distort everything, and there's just no cognizance of it. The real thing that you want is to restrict foreign property purchases and land invasions. Those are the two things you need to do. If you cannot make it easy for people to get a middle-class lifestyle and remain in a middle-class lifestyle, and housing is number one. Housing is the number one thing. Commuting distance is another one. I mean, that affects everyone, sure. But if you cannot offer people a proper ladder, then you hollow out the entire settlement. The entire city's economy gets hollowed out. The people who you need to make it function disappear.
I think you shared the data on, obviously, in a lot of those central suburbs of Cape Town, like Sea Point and others, and the high rate of foreign property ownership there. Did we have any data, or is there any data available on those suburbs further out from Cape Town, like big developments like this?
Well, look, this is data that is held by the deeds office, or it's held by realtors, and so that data in particular was released by a realtor. I can't remember which one. So they showed the top 10 valued suburbs, and then said, what is their share? All of the top 10 suburbs are at least 1/3 owned foreign, and then the top 3 or the top 5, I can't remember which, are all 2/3 owned by foreigners. Wealthy foreigners. I mean, you speak to people like, I mean, you know, our partner over here at the paper, David Wilkinson, was telling us, okay, well, you know, his friends in Kommetjie are saying everyone there now is from the Netherlands. You know, like, great, they're paying rates, but they don't participate in politics, right? They don't understand what's going on locally. They don't care, because at the end of the day, it's just for a portion of their lives, and when they're kind of bored of it, they're going to move on. And when the economy
is, what are the dynamics?
All evaporates.
What are the dynamics in some of these larger suburbs where a larger chunk of the middle class lives in Cape Town, like your Durbanvilles, your Sunningdales, your Milnertons? I imagine it's not going to be at the same level as we're seeing in the peninsula.
No.
But how much of that is being taken over by foreign property owners?
Yeah, but I mean, look, at the moment, I've got my mother-in-law is staying over here while she's looking for a place to live closer to work in that part of the world. And it's exorbitant. It really is exorbitant. I mean, I don't know how anyone sort of gets, you know, it's not easy to get by. And now you look at the costs of living and so on going up like this. There's a fellow who crunched the numbers on, you know, home ownership and so on. And we've got now to the point, because of title deeds being handed out to land invaders and all kinds of stuff, black home ownership is now almost twice as high as white home ownership. Okay. So, you know, so like white people, everything's like double mortgaged and what have you. So only, I think, 35% of the white population own their homes outright. So you could do expropriation by without compensation just by tweaking the interest rates. This is the stupid scenario we find ourselves in, and it's a lack of giving a damn. It's really a lack of giving a damn.
On the property ownership point, have you taken a look at that big development that's proposed on the N7, Milkwood City? It's this million-person city they're apparently planning to build in between Cape Town and Malmesbury. And yeah, lots of affordable housing, or quote-unquote affordable housing, is planned for it.
It's just one of these ugly eyesores where they just plonk these things that look like across. They're sort of like these weirdly big houses with weirdly tiny windows everywhere. I mean, just bloody ugly things. And I mean, look, I've not looked at the project and what the numbers are, what the intentions are. I could give it. I need to. Flipping hell! I've got to look at so many bloody things. But no, I mean, I don't like this. I don't like many of the new developments. Like a cousin of mine is staying in one of the developments, one of these sort of housing complex developments that they built in the 80s here in the Boerland. And the houses are really lovely. They're like sort of they're still in a Cape Dutch style. They've got, I mean, they've been thatched roofs and all of this. And he wasn't earning buckets, you know. And those houses weren't built for the mega rich. They were built for sort of very ordinary middle class people. And I sort of think, well, what is it about property developers in the Cape that they have to build the ugliest thing that they can possibly conceive of? It's perverse. I mean, look, a completely uneconomical point of view, you know, and perhaps a bit sentimental, but I don't know. I just don't like ugliness.
One of the worst places, I think, in terms of architectural beauty is Langebaan. I mean, I've got family there, and every time I drive there, if you look at Langebaan, I mean, everyone's chosen a very ugly styled house in that area, unfortunately. I mean, but the interesting thing is, and we did campaigning in Strathspey as well, which is a very similar dynamic. But
there's some bizarre things over there. Some bizarre things.
The interesting thing is, like, the older part of town is always, you know, fairly nice. The houses are better designed, but then as you get to the new developments in the area, they just look awful. It's a nightmarish landscape.
But you know, you don't have to have like a Victorian thing with brickies lace or like an 18th century Dutch farmhouse to look respectable. It's just you don't have to deliberately make it as ugly as possible. Or what's the new trend that they have around in my area is painting everything grey. It's so grim. It's so grim.
I have to say, we haven't had the same problem, really. I mean, there's a couple of poor developments or houses that have been built, but largely Rebecca Steele's been okay in terms of new houses built here. You have some sort of taste over here.
Oh yeah, no, I mean you guys have a very pretty little sort of nest on that neck of the woods. I like it. But I mean, yeah, the one last sort of big item, because I mean, there hasn't been a lot of sort of big stuff here in the Cape happening this week. The news hasn't been exactly earth shattering.
We've had the taxis writing.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like there's been a major shift in the way that these things are handled. It seems to be the same sort of like niggling bits of violence, I mean, the only sort of thing that seems to have any kind of political angle to it, is the teachers' posts. So okay, well they're not going to fire anyone this year. They settled with the unions, and I think, why is it that you have to do this all the time? I mean, they really need to find a way of culling the worst. And I mean, you look at how strangled the budget is for the province. I mean, to the point that they're struggling to maintain the hospitals, and you think, well, surely you can afford to cut a bit here and there. And but everyone's sort of scared of cutting teachers. They're terrified. But in point of fact, it doesn't look good. But the thing is, you have to sell it with conviction. You have to say, okay, it's not just that we're saving money. It's also that we're getting rid of the worst people, the people who are abusing your children and making them stupid. And, you get rid of the 5% worst teachers, even if you have to make classrooms bigger and reassign teachers from place to place. The consequences will be enormous. Just removing those obstacles to, meaningful childhood development. It's really good. I mean, it's one of the things that really survives empirical testing. Is culling your worst teachers, and you got to do it regularly as well. Keep the turnover high, so you open up spaces for recruiting. Right, teachers can find jobs, young teachers, and the thing is, you kind of know whether they're good or bad eggs after the first 2 years. So it actually makes it easy to have high turnover. You can time it with the medium-term budget cycles, like 3 years have ticked over, let's get rid of another 5%, another 5%, just cut them. And it's just a little bit of fringe social Darwinism, and you'll have a highly qualified and very, very lovely bunch of people working at most schools. But we don't want to do that, because people might be upset. I mean, this isn't a game of cards, as Lee Kuan Yew said,
Yes.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think the one big thing that does sort of ring a few alarm bells, though, is that issue with the Firearms Control Act. Because for me,
is this the one where they wanted to restrict the handcuffs for private security guards and tasers and prevent those guys from using it?
You'd be shocked. It's not even that. It's completely separate. The thing is,
right.
we don't really know what's actually in this amendment that's been cooked up. So, and, Ian Cameron, the thing is, look, we got to wait a week to see what shakes out. But Ian Cameron has been the only one who's been commenting on it, as usual, and look, all of these things together, we're talking about, consolidation of the financial system. I mean, one of the big things I worry about with this cashless stuff is the debanking. Now, people sort of shrug at it, but many, many people have been debanked. The truckers' protests in Canada, where you're talking before he was taken up by a certain kind of supporter, sort of elite support. Tommy Robinson was also debanked. You had Curtis Yarvin. You had before he managed to find an elite to look after him. You had what's that fella's name? Alex Jones. He was debanked for a while. Nick Fuentes. And you're going to go, okay, yeah, you're a bunch of fringe righties and what have you. But when you look at the way the South African government's been behaving with that silly comedian guy, I don't remember his name now. Do you remember the name of that comedian?
Is it Anton Taylor or something like that?
That's the one. That's the one. Anton Taylor. So he just told some stupid, innocuous, okay, he doesn't have much of a sense of humor. He just sort of mocks people in a crude way. He's not very sophisticated. But that kind of doesn't matter. I mean, sure, it was a shock for him that after being loyal to the ANC's ideas and being progressive for so long, that, he would get stung. But, it is actually surprising. But it should actually be surprising because, like, comedians, that's not usually who you go after. But the ANC have actually been making signals about this for a good year or two. They don't like the way that the media conduct themselves. They don't like the way public commentary conducts themselves. They've been trying to find ways to restrict and license screens, streaming, all kinds of things like that. And it moves slowly and haphazardly, and there's lots of different things that are going on. So it's hard to keep track of it. But it's been moving forward. And
the President's Keepers by Jacques Poe.
I keep that's on the reading list, and I never ever get around to it.
Well, so yeah, he actually lives in my town, and he ran a bar on the other side of town here. And when he wrote that book, I think a week after publishing, he got raided. So it isn't exactly a new thing. I think it's just this is a particularly high-profile case in this regard.
Well, yes, but he was doing dangerous journalism. He was doing dangerous journalism. This Mucha was just telling dumb jokes on TikTok. Do you understand?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what it is for me is it feels a bit like a warning shot. It feels a bit like a warning shot. And watching the state accrue so much power, and the thing with the Firearms Control Act, we don't know what they're pushing yet, okay? But the fact that they've been sort of using NEDLAC as a way of saying that they've consulted with the private sector while not consulting the private sector, this is a concern. Because that whole thing that you were mentioning with banning the use of handcuffs, pepper spray, any kind of firearms, etc., from private security, that was a pseudo regulation. It's within their rights as an organization to impose that regulation on the sector. Now, well, I mean, not rationally, but legally, that's like their purview. It's not something that had to be legislated. There's a lot of pressure against these people because it's insane. And the second this kind of stuff goes through, the entire private security sector goes bust, right?
But and then you ask yourself in that question though, is that even? I mean, does the state have the ability to then enforce this? Because as we know, that they're severely outnumbered in terms of police numbers to private security.
Yes, but it's always a question of organization, and the private sector isn't organized. They're just going to give up. Like they're absolutely made of they're made of tissue paper. There is no element of the private sector who has ever resisted anything the ANC's pushed. Look at employment equity, for example. So now what I learned from a friend of mine who's got contacts there is that the actual budget for enforcing employment equity is only 1.4 million rand. If you take the average civil servant salary, the likelihood that they're paying more than 3 people for that job is 0, right? For the whole country. But nobody wants to violate it. There are the union commissars will come around and sort of and try and enforce these things occasionally. But frankly, you don't have to have a unionized workforce, or you could syndicate your own workforce and lock out the bigger unions. And you can, and then you just write a letter to the Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Labor. They sorry guys, we just couldn't find anyone qualified for these jobs in our area. So unfortunately, we're going to have to violate your quotas. Terribly sorry. They'll get to that letter a year later.
Yeah.
And then they'll say yes, but no, but, and then you can file an appeal and wait another year. And there's nothing wrong with this process. As long as you provide an excuse, they have to come and check up and they have to come and appeal. And, this friend of mine is in industrial relations. I mean, he says, look, in his experience and in his field, everyone kind of, people he knows know that the government really can't actually check up on this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
They don't have the bandwidth. So
that gets to my point that, if this law does go through, for example, regulating private security, does it actually get enforced? Because I know, for example,
because what will happen is they don't have to enforce it. Because this is what I'm saying. They don't have to enforce it. It'll self-enforce. Because the companies will go bust. Then what do? Well, they can't do anything, right? So the only security guards left will be people who are employed by organized crime and by the state. That's it.
No, but my point on that though is I don't see companies, at least on this point, self-enforcing if there's no real legal threat to it. So I can give you an example here in where I am. I know the police don't want to undermine things that are going to make their jobs more difficult. So if you basically destroy the private sector here, the private security sector here, and really start to try and enforce that rule, it would just make the police's job 10 times harder, 100 times harder. So I think they would come to some sort of informal arrangement.
But this is what I'm saying. It's got nothing to do with states' enforcement capacity. It's got to do with the private sector's willingness to resist. And you've got to consider what resistance would look like. It would be highly visible. And you're doing something that people find scary. So somebody is going to investigate someone and make an example, right? And they're going to be sent to jail. And no one wants to be Spartacus. So it doesn't matter how low the enforcement, no one wants to go first. And this is true of almost everything. So, and when you listen to what the leaders of these private security companies actually say themselves, it's like, okay, well, that's the over. We're all packing our bags, right? They said this is like how they're going to respond to it. They're not going to resist. They don't care. They're going to run away, right? Because who needs this fucking, trouble? Beg your pardon, excuse my language. But I mean, you've got to, the way you get around this is you have to actually have a dedicated organization to whom these people ascribe, who's going to stand up and say, we are doing this, we are not taking cues from you. But the second that you say we're allowed to be armed and you're not, that there's only like the last time that someone did that was, the ANC, It's resistance movements do this. The last time a civilian group in South Africa says they're not letting go of their guns was in 1922, I think, in occupied Namibia, in Southwest Africa. It was the Bondelsarts rebellion. And my great-uncle, great-uncle maybe, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it. Gijsbert Hofmeyer decides he's going to drop bombs on these people from the nascent Air Force. Of course, also used on the Rand Rebellion. But besides the point, it's the state does not abide competing forces unless there's, reason to ignore them. Because, here's the thing, is if you let sort of the minority populations have security that is not related to a commercial enterprise like drug dealing, right? It becomes a political question. Drug dealers are not a political question until they get to an enormous size, and then, then they become a corrosive force. They don't directly challenge the state in most cases because they cannot. It's not really possible for them to achieve deep legitimacy. But something that's protecting the legitimate private sector and people's neighborhoods, right? An illicit force that's doing that, a militia group, those are the things states care about. So, and, people in private security understand this equation instinctively. So this is a problem. This is a deep problem. And when I look at the cluster of legislation that Ramaphosa is bringing through, I think something very nasty is going to happen in the coming decade. Something very ugly. I just, yeah. I don't know what exactly to do about it right now. You go to Dear South Africa, write your letters, make sure you do your public input, join Sakeliga, join and donate to any of these organizations, Cape Independence Movement, anything that moves the ball away from where it's rolling would be excellent. But until something bigger changes on the political landscape, it's like, well, you're just going to have to dig in and hope that you can throw your body on the gears somewhat.
Most importantly as well, donate to the Cape Independent so we can allow you to do more of your investigative work in this regard.
You're too kind. Speaking of Cape Independence,
I do actually have to head off, unfortunately, now because
I've got an event
to attend to. But yeah, thanks for having me on, and hopefully I can come back soon to discuss some more of these developments, especially Cape Independence.
Right, for sure. Okay. See you, Rob.
See you soon. Cheers.
All right. Well, there's a last little treat before we log off and everything. I'm going to share something that I've been working on. Now, let me just make sure that I'm picking the right thing. Now, I did put this. So now, I want to make sure I pick the right page because this is a report that I'm being paid for. So I don't want to share too much of what I'm writing. But I do have something that's kind of fun. And that is this. So this is a demographic projection of the Western Cape's population going into 2030. So, okay, it's not looking excellent. Black people become the majority and so on. But the thing is, that's the tipping point. 2030 is actually the tipping point for when a referendum could succeed. I mean, I did a little bit of maths. And as it turns out, despite how scary this little graph looks, if you look at the best and worst, like the highest and lowest numbers of support for Cape Independence, just before and just after the GNU, right, you will see that you'll see that there's still sort of fairly reasonable support. But these are not adjusting for intention to vote, for registration status. So I plugged those numbers in and adjusted them for the population levels that you see there in 2030. And then the population, and then the range that you get out of that based on the different turnout levels that you get for the races. The range of support is between 38 and 64%. Now, there's some fancier statisticians who'll try and, people whose maths knowledge is better than mine, who might use, try and figure out, confidence levels and all of that. But without an actual live data set, you're not really cooking with gas anyway. So all of this becomes back of the envelope. But these doing a simple model like this, the midpoint between those two numbers is actually 51%. So the 51% says, well, we got an even chance. And that means we could we just have to get the referendum. But look, that sounds like an easy peasy thing, but it's actually hard. We're going to have to, between the various parties that support this, they have to capture around 5 to 10% of the electorate in 2029. That means finding a slice of the municipal government in at least 3 municipalities by the end of next year. So this is the problem: is we are still struggling to get out of the starting gates. Okay, I mean, we got the Cape Independence Party's got 2 seats in the city of Cape Town. And I know there are talks going on between the Referendum Party and the Cape Independence Party to merge. But I am sensing trouble there. Now, there are some parties, there's a sense that, for some, that there's no urgency here, but the urgency is actually absolute. There's no ability to play with time here. And the parties have to merge, and they have to do it on a reasonable basis. And there has to be restructuring that takes the strengths of both of these organizations together. If that doesn't happen, then it's none of this is going to work. There needs to be an improvement in professionalization of this political party that's going to represent the movement going into the next elections. This is not happening. Okay? This is just not happening. I don't see it. And the idea that you can just spaff money at it while convincing to some, I don't find that sufficient. Nor is there money to spaff in the first place. So we are hoping on that. In the meantime, one of the big things that needs to be touched on, I think, in terms of long-term thinking, would be that a protest strategy will need to come out in the next couple of months. So people need to organize to tackle issues that are directly related to colored identity, Cape identity, housing waiting lists, the PI Act, the Prevention of Illegal Eviction Act, which is an egregious little thing, and then, of course, land invasions. There is a way to tackle all of these topics together, but that requires coordinating with people who have been sitting on the waiting list for some time, coordinating with colored leadership. And I know that Fadil Adams has been talking about these issues somewhat, but he lacks a concrete strategy of action. And on that note, I'm just going to answer some of the questions, because there have been a couple of little questions from our very meager audience at the moment. If I did this on my main channel, I'll be getting a few hundred, but I need to do it on this channel, or else it'll never bloody get off the ground. So we're going to have to deal with the small rooms, I'm afraid, guys. So the Cape report greets me. That's David Wilkinson, friend and partner of the Cape Independent, has produced some nice content for us and helped me put the website together, amongst other things. Smart guy. And he says, are the DA a majoritarian? Are they majoritarians at heart? Professor Koosmalan could explain something of their responses. That's an interesting perspective. I guess the Melanian sort of direction on this would be to say that they ascribe to the same idea of the state that the ANC does, as a sort of multicultural black dominant society whose aim is redress and redistribution. Material equality is the ultimate goal. And that, I think the difference is that the DA genuinely do believe in this sort of blank slatist sort of perspective, whereas the ANC are doing it because it's a stepping stone to a black absolutist control of everything. So that is a distinction. But between them, there are a lot of consonant points. And I think the majoritarianism thing comes out of the fact that the DA are abhorrent of racialism, even though it's a fact of society that most of South Africa are racialists, if not outright racists. I'm using the very old-fashioned distinction being, racialist meaning, well, you believe that races are different and that policies should be based around this and so on. And to an extent, that would include me, because I think that you can't make people's attitudes evaporate overnight, and so you have to manage them. And then you got racists where it's sort of like, okay, actually it's an outright hostile competition. There's no ability to accommodate. It's only this. And the ANC are that. They are, in that latter sense, racist. I don't try and use these terms dryly and unemotionally. So yeah, I think the thing is the DA don't see that. They don't even want to get as far as racialism. The idea of using race in any way is sort of a difficult thing that they don't know how to address. And they always offer kind of compromises. Well, what if we could do this so that it achieves the goals that you're telling us that it actually does? So, bring about racial equality and so on, and while keeping the economy growing and so on. But that's not really what is going on here. That's not the point of the DA. And the new employment equity guidelines are designed around making sure that the white population is winnowed away. So they're going to continue revising those proportions down and down until they're zero. And with every new downward revision of the quota for minorities will leave the country or drop out of the workforce. And as they do that, their new representativity must be reflected in the following year's statistics, which chases away even more until you get zero. So it's an ethnic cleansing program that's very slow and methodical. And the worst part is that it's self-inflicted because they have no capacity to enforce this whatsoever, as I said. And what we're doing is we're doing it to ourselves because we refuse to comply. Because we insist on complying, shall I say. We refuse to rebel. And I think the thing about it is if you're the DA and you're non-racialist, then majoritarianism is sort of a given, isn't it? Because if they're the majority, then they're going to be the majority of the voices. But you can't recognize that that's what's going on because you have to say all their voices are actually the same and deep down they want identical things. It's very strange that you have this sort of thing of, all human beings are individuals. We're all so very different. And yet the same person that says that will say, actually, no, but that means that we're all exactly identical and that we have identical desires, identical wishes, and all policies must be identical at every level for everybody, which is really bizarre. And I think that's partially why socialism makes such an inroad with them. It's because at a certain point, the two start blurring. Because, reasonable corrections for what looks like a reasonable correction for unearned advantages in society, whether they stem from race or not, is part and parcel of the idea of having, what's the word? Equality of opportunity. And the equality of opportunity stuff, by the way, just also some really nice graphs from the general household surveys from 2003, 2013, and 2023. And you can see that the overall figure, the rate of formal housing in the whole of the country goes 74, 78, and then 84. Okay, and then Western Cape goes down from 85 to 82 to 80. And that's because the Western Cape is incentivizing land invasions. The land invasion, the informal settlement rate is now higher in the Western Cape than it is in Gauteng. And at the provincial level, we're dead last, When you look at the cities, the metropoles, and there's another graph for this, there's another graph for this. But there's one city that's worse than Cape Town, and that's Durban. Durban has a worse rate of informal housing. Squatter camps, as they used to be called, But of course now, I actually think they're probably right. I mean, as PC as it is, I think actually informal housing is probably the right term, because an informal settlement, there's a sort of permanence implied by it, whereas a squatter camp feels like you're there for a weekend. And they're not there for a weekend, they're there for a lifetime. So look. Let's have a look at the other questions, because there are a few more, and then I'm going to check off and try and fill the newspaper up. So David again, I think it's because most people have brought into social justice. Most people want to support the majority because of whatever silly reason. Thing is, I'm not so interested in whether or not it's about the majority or the minority, because sometimes the majority are sensible and sometimes they aren't. Not so much in South Africa, but broadly speaking, as a principle. The whole thing of social justice is, well, it's a peculiar sort of thing that says, well, if you have anything in your life that you didn't 100% earn yourself, then you have no right to it. But also that nothing you get in life is actually a result of your own efforts. Therefore, you don't deserve it. So if you're really smart, well, that's just biological. If you're well born, that's class-based. If you are doing well and you're white, it's because you're white. And if it's because you're male, it's because you're male. And you can divide this any sort of which way you want. Eventually, everybody has to be crippled, and turn into Harrison Bergeron. But I think that it always comes up against friction, because everybody hates this. I mean, it's a lot of fun to tear people down. A lot of people like this, and for a lot of people, it's more important to tear others down than it is to help those beneath them. And I think that's the prevailing character, and has been remarked by dozens of people in dozens of time periods for many different people, many different backgrounds. It prevails. It's more important to tear down those above you than it is to boost those below you. But me, I remain Aristotelian. I always think it's about the middle. How can you make sure that the people in the middle are the ones who are actually deciding things, and that they are of a decent quality? It's a very difficult conversation. That involves a lot of dimensions in society. So there's a guy called Johan Vihan. Said, how did our Stellenbosch youth event go, by the way? It was a minor success. I mean, I met some very nice guys there. Struggled to convince the DA student organization guy of my perspective on matters, but he was amiable enough. Seemed like an okay guy. I think still afraid to embrace ideas that are quite as sort of spiky and radical as mine, with good cause. I understand why. I mean, there's a lot of social pressure against it, and also, who really wants to see the world in such a bleak manner as I do? It can be a bit grim at times. One has to have a sense of humor about it, I suppose. It's genuinely quite absurd, and absurdity is painful when you're living through it, but quite amusing from afar if you can detach yourself quite well enough. But Mr. Vihan, like the report that took down the old system. Anyway, my guess would be that black people are already a majority in the Western Cape, that most people didn't even participate in the previous census. You may have a point there. However, people trashing the census are people who are looking for a greater degree of accuracy, But if you take population samples, they give you a good rough guide. I mean, it's not going to be off by 10, 15%, It's very unlikely. Very unlikely. And I mean, look, you bring up a good point. On the other hand, if you're going to make estimates, if you have to try and sort of get enough knowledge to do a thing, just to say, here's when the decision has to go down, here's the deadline, here's what needs to be done, then, well, you've only got the data you've got. So you've got to use it, even if it's a little bit shabby. The problem with ideas like Cape Independence is that it would require minorities to get off their seats and stand up for something that would be seen as offensive. Most won't do that because they're comfortable. Quite right. Almost everyone I talk to who claims to support Cape Independence in one way or the other want somebody else to do it for them. You know, when you look at, I don't know what to tell you. And yeah, I believe that the okay, sausage. Well, okay. Well, I can't bring my daughter up on my lap because she has decided to be Ja, ek hoor jou. I can't bring her up here because she is naked. Although maybe a little heady poke over the top. Because she just wants to be with me at all these times. But I think that calls it a day. So everybody keep well and keep your chin up. And if you have any availability, please do look up the Cape Independence Advocacy Group or the Cape Independence Party or the CIA or the Referendum Party, whichever organization that you can find that you feel is the best way to get involved. Join it and do something. I mean, you'd be surprised at, I mean, look, my way of dealing with this is to relentlessly try and dig up all of this kind of nonsense that I dig up. But, you know, maybe you're a legal expert. Maybe you have, maybe you're in sort of industrial relations or, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Maybe you're in graphic design. There's always somebody that can be useful somewhere. And so, just pitch up. I mean, look, they'll always find a use for you. If they can't find a use for you, then you get worried. But generally speaking, there's something to do, even if it's just, I don't know, setting up a local branch of whatever party. Having those branches in place is kind of important. Hello, sweetie. And because we've got to start gearing up for the municipal elections now. Helen Zille's on the trail. We've got to get on the trail. You know? And some of you might even make better candidates than the ones we've got. So, you know, yeah. You get in touch with them. Get on the bus. Stand on a ticket or whatever it is. I need to ring off. Bye, people. And I don't know. Just don't be like what Johan Vihan said in this comment, because he says he said something quite correct, I think, where he says most whites deep down believe that they deserve it. And then have a backup plan through immigration. See, that's the thing, is they believe that they deserve it in the abstract, and then someone else gets to deserve it in effigy on their behalf. And then they get to stand clear and say, yes, well, we really did deserve all of that. Yes, but you didn't stand and deliver, did you? Well, that's most of them. That's most of them. Oh. Don't be like that. Oh, anyway. All right. That's good. Have a good weekend, people.